Robert Rodriguez sacrificed the biggest opportunity of his career to do right by Frank Miller on Sin City. Sin City hit theaters 20 years ago this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The story behind Sin City starts in Montpelier, Vermont in the 1960s, where future comic book writer and artist Frank Miller grew up reading comics and watching film noirs. By the late 70s, he was working in the comics industry full-time, and in the early 80s, he changed the medium forever when he brought noir elements to Marvel's Daredevil. Then in 1986, he'd do it again with the groundbreaking Dark Knight Returns miniseries. Miller had carved out a style all his own, but he wasn't done innovating. In 1991, he created Sin City, an original comic that was both the culmination of his noir influences, but also a rejection of superheroes. As he explained in a 2016 interview, "I've been a fanatic for a long time of old crime movies and old crime novels. The old Cagney movies, Bogart, and all that. They're all about right and wrong. In Sin City in particular, I wanted them all to happen in a world where virtuous behavior was rare. I wanted it to be a world out of balance where virtue is defined by individuals in difficult situations, not by an overwhelming sense of goodness that is somehow governed by this godlike comics code." Miller was also heavily influenced by manga, Japanese comic books, telling Dazed, "I realized when I started Sin City that I found American and English comics to be too wordy, too constipated, and Japanese comics to be too empty. So I was attempting to do a hybrid." Miller released Sin City through the year 2000 with Dark Horse Comics, and the series was a hit. Miller won several Eisner Awards for his work. According to a Wired article from 2005, handsome movie offers followed, but Miller never sold the rights to a Hollywood studio because he had a bad experience writing RoboCop 2. He also didn't think it was possible to make a live-action version of Sin City, thanks to its distinct, nearly monochromatic color palette and sparse storytelling. Until he got a call from director Robert Rodriguez in January 2004. Rodriguez had made a name for himself with scrappy genre films like Desperado and From Dusk Till Dawn, as well as futuristic, effects-heavy popcorn fare like the Spy Kids franchise, which is partly why he was drawn to Sin City. As he told Wired, "Having finished the Spy Kids series, I was looking for a good effects challenge." So he cold-called Miller and said he was interested in adapting Sin City. Usually in that situation, a filmmaker or a studio would buy the film rights away from the author and go off and write a screenplay. Instead, Rodriguez invited Miller to come to his studio in Texas and shoot with him for one day. Quote, "If you like what you see, we'll make a deal. If not, the short film is yours to keep." So Miller flew to Austin and watched Rodriguez shoot some digital test footage for a Sin City movie against a 30-foot tall green screen. Rodriguez hired actors Josh Hartnett and Marley Shelton for the short, and they did a scene directly from Miller's Sin City comic, The Customer Is Always Right. Later that day, Rodriguez edited the footage together in Avid, put in some special effects, some music, and screened it for Frank Miller. While most movies are shot on digital today, digital filmmaking was relatively new at that time, so what Rodriguez had just accomplished in one day was pretty remarkable. Miller was blown away, and they agreed to make the movie together as co-directors. That 3-minute short ended up becoming the opening scene of the film. Rodriguez was not interested in adapting Sin City as much as he just wanted to translate it to the screen, so they used Miller's comics as literal storyboards. While they made minor changes like cutting some dialogue, colorizing different objects, removing some nudity, and changing some of the violence, the movie is basically a one-to-one adaptation of the first, third, and fourth books in Miller's series: The Hard Goodbye, The Big Fat Kill, and The Yellow Bastard. While the aforementioned Customer Is Always Right came from the sixth book. The movie is so faithful to the comics, it doesn't have any credited screenwriters. The movie's writing credit is simply based on the graphic novels by Frank Miller. During the pre-production process, the Weinsteins came on board as producers, making the movie under their imprint Dimension Films, which was the genre side of Miramax. Rodriguez had previously worked with Dimension on From Dusk Till Dawn, and the studio set the budget at $40 million. But a week before filming was supposed to begin, the Directors Guild called up Rodriguez and said he and Miller could not be credited as co-directors on the film. It was against DGA rules. Apparently, the Guild allows established pairs like the Coens and the Wachowskis to be credited together, but not newly formed teams. But Rodriguez felt strongly that Miller should be a co-director because they'd be recreating his images. So at first, Rodriguez offered to give up his directing credit, making Miller the sole director, but Frank Miller refused to have Rodriguez step down. But Rodriguez didn't want to take full credit, so at the end of the day, he decided to resign from the DGA. And that had a huge impact on his career, as he was supposed to shoot a $100 million adaptation of John Carter for Paramount later that year. Paramount fired Rodriguez from John Carter because he was no longer in the union, replacing him with Jon Favreau. That film's development ultimately fell apart in 2006. While Disney would go on to make a John Carter movie in 2012, that became one of the biggest bombs of all time. So maybe Rodriguez dodged a bullet. Who knows? Anyway, free of the GGA's oppressive rules, Miller and Rodriguez went into production on Sin City on March 29, 2004, just a few months after they first met. They started filming at Rodriguez's Troublemaker Studios in Austin without any big-name actors attached. They just started shooting scenes with stand-ins, and they later added the main cast to those shots digitally. Sin City ended up having a cast stacked with movie stars, including Bruce Willis, Mickey Rourke, Clive Owen, Jessica Alba, Rosario Dawson, Brittany Murphy, Elijah Wood, and Benicio del Toro. Rodriguez and Miller assembled this starry cast by showing them the 3-minute short. The movie also includes a pre-famed Nick Offerman in a minor role, while Frank Miller cameos as a priest and Rodriguez cameos on the SWAT team. Michael Madsen told Latino Review he was cast after he approached Rodriguez at the Kill Bill rap party and asked him why he wasn't going to be in Sin City. Rodriguez wondered the same and gave him the only part that hadn't been cast yet, Bob. Rodriguez originally offered the role of Jackie Boy to Johnny Depp, but Depp couldn't do it due to his prior commitments. So he cast Benicio del Toro after seeing him with longer hair at the Oscars. Like the test footage, they shot the movie on digital, which was still rare at this time. Rodriguez told Wired, "This movie wouldn't even be possible if I shot it on film." He explained that this is because of all the digital environments and mostly black and white color palette. The movie was shot entirely against green screen, though Miller pointed out that the guns and cars were real. The film's signature white blood was done by shining black lights on a fluorescent red liquid that they then adjusted to white in post. Yellow Bastard, who is of course yellow in the movie, was actually painted blue during filming because it provided more of a contrast with the green screen. He was then turned yellow in post. Rodriguez brought his pal Quentin Tarantino in to guest direct one scene in the film, the car scene with Clive Owen and Benicio del Toro. Tarantino was very skeptical of digital filmmaking at the time, and Rodriguez told Wired, "Quentin did a scene where the actors are in a car and it's raining. Instead of worrying about all that stuff, the car and the rain were added later, and he could just get the performance." Tarantino was happy with the results, saying, "Mission accomplished, I'm glad you brought me down here." The whole experience apparently opened his mind to shooting on digital in the future, but to this day, Tarantino still shoots all of his movies on film. He did also receive a directing credit on Sin City. Tarantino also lent the movie some props. The swords that Mojo uses are the same ones used by the Crazy 88 in Kill Bill. And if you'd like to know how efficient Rodriguez was on set, Brittany Murphy shot all of her scenes in one day. Besides co-directing and producing, Rodriguez is also credited as the film's cinematographer and editor, and as a musician, he also wrote part of the film's score. He had initially asked Hans Zimmer to score the film, but Zimmer was busy preparing Batman Begins. Sin City opened on 3,230 screens April 1st, 2005, taking in $28 million opening weekend, landing at number 1. It would go on to gross $159 million worldwide, nearly 4 times its budget. Critics were mostly positive on the movie. 76% of the 256 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes were positive, with many of them praising the movie for its technical wizardry. The movie was actually in competition at Cannes in 2005, where it won the technical grand prize. The film also won a number of Saturn Awards, and Jessica Alba won Sexiest Performance at the MTV Movie Awards. 9 years later, Rodriguez and Miller made the sequel, Sin City: A Dame to Kill For, with returning actors Bruce Willis, Mickey Rourke, Rosario Dawson, and Jessica Alba. Critics and audiences agreed that it wasn't that great. The sequel flopped at the box office, making just $39 million against a $65 million budget. Miller and Rodriguez had planned to do a third movie, potentially with Johnny Depp joining the franchise, but it was canceled after the sequel bombed. And yet, after that, there were 2 attempts made at a Sin City TV series. In 2017, Dimension considered a TV reboot. Frank Miller was involved, and it was going to have new characters and stories, but it never materialized. And then in 2019, Deadline reported that Legendary had acquired the TV rights and was developing both a live-action and animated series, with Miller and Rodriguez serving as executive producers. But 6 years later, nothing has come of that either.